Welcome everyone today. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to share my screen and we will get started. So hopefully you could all, should all be able to see my screen right now, unless you've got the Microsoft logo. Tell me what you can see. Microsoft logo or PowerPoint presentation?
PowerPoint presentation, Sam.
Good.
But we can see the presenter mode, not the actual.
Okay. Well, we don't want the presenter mode, do we? We want, bear with me 1 second. How are everyone anyway? Everyone all right?
Do you guys remember the $6 million man? You know, there used to be a thing in that we have the technology.
Yeah, no, we don't at the moment. Let me just, we did a run through literally half an hour ago, didn't we, Tracy? And this was working perfectly. How's about that? That's better, isn't it? There we go. Okay. Welcome everyone to our, I've lost count of where we're up to, how many roundtables. We've got with us today one of our original presenters back. Tracy Keeling originally presented on our very first Zoom roundtable back in April, was it, Tracy?
It was.
Just after lockdown. And back then, the world looked like a completely different place to where we are now. And it's a long distant memory of sun was shining and it was all a bit new to us, this, wasn't it? Now it's kind of a bit like Groundhog Day. But thankfully, Tracy's back. And last time, Tracy was talking about business continuity. And I think back then, everyone was panicking. It was all about cash flow. How to kind of what you were going to do next. And Tracy guided us through that, you know, keep calm and carry on. And now 6 months down the line, we're talking about digital transformation. Last week we had Stuart College, or not last week, week before last. Stuart was talking to us about his 9 steps to successful digital transformation. Tracy's going to be talking about what can go wrong and why, and how to avoid those things. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of Tracy. Tracy has 25 years plus experience, believe it or not, of leading digital innovation projects. She has turned around more projects than she can remember, I'm guessing. And Tracy has advised or consulted for 50 of the top FTSE 250 organisations, businesses in the UK. So that is one heck of a CV. So I'm going to now hand over to Tracy. We've got some people just waiting to join, so I'm just going to let them into the room. If you can all, just a bit of housekeeping as normal, if you can all just mute yourself for now. Tracy's going to lead the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tracy. Tracy, do you want to just say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody. There we go.
Right, I'm going to mute myself now. If I can find my mouse, there we go. And then I'm going to just go. You just tell me when to go to the next slide, Tracy. Okay.
Okay, next one. There we go. So, oh, next one, Sam. There we go. Okay, so within business, some businesses put transformation at the top of their list. Others certainly don't. They just see transformation as something that they have to do when the imperative comes up and there's no other option. But what's really important, and one of the first things they teach you when you go to university, if you study management, the first couple of weeks is the worst thing that you can ever do is do nothing. I think the second best thing, according to Theodore Roosevelt, and absolutely agree with, is don't do the wrong thing. It's making sure that you have that expertise in place to understand not only what's the right thing to do, but to understand what those pitfalls are and to avoid them up front. McKinsey are quite open about the fact that roughly 70% of transformations will fail in one shape, way, or form or another. Next one, Sam. So very top headlines as to what you use and what usually goes wrong. So before you even start, if it doesn't hit the right roadmap, if it doesn't hit an executive's agenda for what they want to do for corporate strategy, you won't even get your idea off the ground. If you get to the point where you've got a business case, you might find that you don't define the outcome that people want and the business actually wants. And that will be another reason for it to just stop before it even gets to the point of starting. Fail to start. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this. It could be the fact that there are multiple things going on. We could get a world pandemic, which will change the way that you're looking at things and your business priorities. It could be the fact that we don't have enough resource, or certain things have moved since that first idea happened. We could, again, as we start to go through, fail to meet the timelines. These are really pretty critical. Lots of things that we forgot to do, things that we missed out, things that we assumed. All of these are covered in detail as we go through the slides in more detail, but it was just to give you a very basic. And then failing to meet costs. This can happen at any point during the project. You could get to a gate review, you could get to a point where you have to buy something, and all of the things that you've said that you're going to achieve, for some reason you haven't managed to do. And then again, as you go through, failing to meet business expectations. The business could be expecting to see one thing, your sponsor could be expecting to see another, and your project team are expecting to build something which is slightly different. Bringing everybody onto that same page so that we all move in the same direction is an art form. And people do underestimate how difficult this can be. And it has been a cause of many things that I've seen starting to go pear-shaped. When we get to the very, very end, I think the worst thing that can have happened is you've gone all the way through. You think that you've met everything that you're expected to do and that you were planning to do, and then the business says you've not delivered against the expected outcome. And that's the worst of all things, because by that point you've gone so far to the right that it's extremely costly to put it right and to try and get that back to where it should be. Next slide, Sam. So let's have a really good look at some of these causes in a bit more detail. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these. You've seen some of these lists before, but I'm just going to pick a few out because there are some case studies afterwards which I think will be more interesting to you to have a look at. Some key things: executive prioritization. You won't find this in the project management methodologies. So you could potentially find that a project starts to get the traction it needs. It's got the executive sponsorship, the senior executives are on board, and then all of a sudden something comes along, for example, COVID in our case, or it could just be a shift in strategy because some new technologies come out which could help the business. And they could have either been involved with your project on a great deal of detail, they've really prioritized the transformation, and then they've had to step back because they've forgotten to do certain things within the business and they've taken the eye off the ball. Even executives can get caught out because there are so many things and so many plates that they're spinning that your focus can be moved from one side to another, and that will have a huge impact if a sponsor is there for the first part of the project and then takes a step back and the business don't feel that it's being backed anymore.
Sorry, Tracy, I was just flicking by mistake. Do apologise. Carry on.
Okay. So some of the other really critical things are the stakeholder parts. Lots of people get the IT side involved rather than the business. It sounds fundamental, but those business people are the ones who are going to be your change champions. Those are going to drive through. They're going to be the people who are your best advocates for what it is you're trying to do in the business. And people underestimate their value. Sometimes they're sidelined. Comms are given third, fourth, fifth priority, and that engagement piece. And it really should be higher up, because I've seen so many projects where the offering, the proposal, the project plans, everything else has been stellar. And then at some point, somebody says, but we didn't engage the stakeholders and we've got pushback and they're not interested and they won't engage with the project. And lots of them have failed. And to bring that back on track is an incredibly difficult thing to do once you've lost your stakeholders. It's not impossible, it can be done, but it's a difficult task. Some more skill sets. People don't realize that transformation and business as usual skill sets are very, very different. They always have been. If you have a BAU person and you're attempting to make them into a transformation specialist for one project, the chances are is without some significant training, mentoring or help, they're not going to succeed. And your chances of actually delivering that project successfully are really quite low. People do underestimate how those skill sets are very, very different. It's very rare to find somebody who can sit on both sides of the fence and can drive in the same way to the same results. So it's something to be aware of. Again, capacity and expertise. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right number? And do we have the expertise within the business to do this? Lots and lots of things fail for these reasons. So a lot of those you'll have seen before. So next slide, Sam. So for me, process issues, very rough grouping. Learning from experience. So Sam and I were talking earlier. What if you've had a project, something similar, you've done it 3 times before and it's failed 3 times before? In that case, your 4th attempt is more than likely going to fail unless you do something differently. So before you start any project, even if it's an informal chat with 3 or 4 people around the coffee machine, have we tried some of this before? Have we done it? Did it succeed? What worked? What didn't work? That learning from experience before you start will save you thousands and thousands of pounds in remedial action if you've already planned for those potential problems up front and worked them in or worked a contingency into your project plan for them. It makes you look good because by that point, you know, all of these problems we've thought about, we've looked at, we've got mitigation for, we understand what could happen, and we've thought about some potential alternatives. It's better to do it before you start. It's a really good learning point. And it's worked incredibly well for me with the clients I've been to. Not something that they're used to doing. They're used to doing the learning from experience afterwards, but I always do it up front. Another thing, partnering model. Very different if it's in-house, outsourced, one or more multiple partners. You've got to define your partnering model and do it well. And contractually, it needs to be absolutely locked down. Because if you're working on assumptions that somebody is doing something and someone else is, the chances are those assumptions will be wrong and things will fall through the cracks. There'll be delays, there won't be good handovers, it won't be good quality that you're passing between the partners, and things do tend to rack up cost. Governance as well. You've seen all these before, but you should never start a project with issues. I've seen lots who've gone in with absolute numbers of issues that they've then got to start firefighting from day one. You should never be signing off and starting a project with any form of issues. Change board approvals, everything that you're doing around your governance should be absolutely locked down. There should be expectation and standards across everything that you do so that nothing is substandard when it's put forward and has to be reworked. It's an ideal world. You will get some, but it will cut it down. And then, of course, the big one, overarching corporate initiative management. If you have multiple plates that you're spinning, you need to understand that if you've got a limited pot of resources, what happens if one of those is delayed? Which one gets the highest priority? Do we have an overarching list? Lots of companies actually don't have one at all. And they come unstuck where they find they've got delays or issues with procurement and it has to be pushed back and all of a sudden their resource isn't available, which destroys the overall cost model. Next one, Sam. Okay, so some technology things to look for as well. Make sure that your contracts are well and truly locked down and it covers everything that you need to. If you're contracting for new systems or new ways of working with partners, make sure that when you do that, you understand what it is that they're going to dovetail into. So understand what your assets are, understand that your assets might not be as accurate as they could be, and you've done as much due diligence on your own estate as you would be with your partners and going forward. We talked earlier as well about system documentation. You know, anybody that's worked with some diehard technical teams will know that everybody hates documentation. It's the last thing that everybody ever looks at. But I tell you what, it's the first thing that you'll cry about when you come to put a new system in place and we don't know what it does. We don't know who the users are. We don't know where they sit. We don't know what systems it integrates with, and we certainly don't know what version it's on. Those are the things that you then have to start to plan around, and they increase your risk. So it's really critical that lots of these things, you just go through a checklist in your head. Have I looked at? Do I know about? Is this there? If it's not there, how do I mitigate that risk? And something that Sam had never heard of is putting your code in escrow. Lots of people haven't done this. It is available, it is there. if you come out of a system, sometimes you can get disputes around who owns the IP, who owns the code, who owns the data. GDPR's done wonders for that, but you can actually put your own system code, if it's yours that you own, where you've made changes to it, in escrow, and then you don't have the issues of getting it back if you decide to then go with another vendor. So next one, Sam. Okay, so last one, the customer. People kind of think, well, this is our organization, this is what we're going to do, this affects us. The impact on the customer is absolutely fundamental. And one example I had of this was where we had an ordering system. So we had backward and forward integration. They could order using our online portal. They could order what they wanted and we would ship it to them. What they were doing was replacing that back-end system. It was very old, it was very outdated. What they hadn't realized was the replacement for it was so complex that it made it difficult for the customer to do business with us. The customers started to drop off and find alternative suppliers. It had an immense impact on a £1 billion business. So it was something that they should have considered up front. Train your customer. If they have to go into that system, that was one of the failures. They didn't communicate with them and tell them what was coming in the right timeframes. And the customer experience in this case was so much worse. If they'd have just thought a little bit about it and put themselves in that customer's shoes, done that user experience and that journey, they might not have chosen that exact system. They might have taken a different route. So, Sam, next one. So, some case studies. Next slide. So, I've tried to choose 3 different types here. So, we have various types. Obviously, no client names mentioned because these are all real. The transformation for this one, they were putting 100,000 new machines with some applications on them in under certain profiles for all of the users. So the client was fully on board. This was a very expensive transformation. Lots of teams have been put in place of 600 transformation people across project managers, program managers, testers, developers, the whole gamut that you'd expect. 2 key partners were delivering together, and I was taken in and I was told, do you know what, we're not doing this. We're not going to meet the timeframes and there are going to be penalty clauses. Please find us the root cause, give us a plan on what we do, and if you need to, help us to make it work, to make it better. So there's lots of ways you can do things, but over the years, because I've done so many now, I've developed a sixth sense. There are about 42 key causes that tend to pop up all the time. So I did some interviews with the leadership and sat with Chatham House Rules with the cross-section of the programme team to say, whatever you tell me, I'm not here to point fingers and crucify people. I'm here to just get it working. I'm here to hold hands and help if I need to. So I looked at programme plans, I looked at PMO metrics, went through all of the dashboards for what they were actually planning to deliver and the actuals. And the key thing for me was, are they doing lots of rework? So I did a Lean Six Sigma assessment to look through all of this and to assess it on the consultancy level as well as a program management level. And the other thing, which was really interesting that not a lot of people would have thought about, was I actually sat around the offices and I sat there on a different place every day and listened to the teams and listened to the team meetings in an open office of what they were doing, what their frustrations were, what they were struggling to do. And then I went and sat and took notes in the governance boards. I actually just went in as a consultant. I wasn't introduced in the sense of what I was doing. It was just another consultant on the account. So next one, Sam. So coming out of this, I was quite surprised about this. I did a board presentation, not much, probably 10 slides. I like using pictures. I certainly don't write War and Peace for my clients. I tend to do things as quickly as I can, provided them with a root cause analysis. So some of the things that I provided them with are on the next 2 slides. One of them was a simple diagram with these triangles on. So you could see where they were struggling and you could see what the outcomes were from the helicopter view. So one with the current position, planning, not great, complexity, didn't get it. Customer, they weren't sure what was going on either. And for the government, quite informal, quite patchy, things were just dropping through the cracks. And I wanted to give them a plan to move them firstly to an interim position and then to a final position which was more stable. So we moved to weekly planning. We moved to making sure that they understood the full picture and what they were actually doing end to end with all the teams, to understand the customer and the complete picture that was going on. And the governance, you know, they started to do proper governance and to formalize that as the weeks went on, just to help the program managers to not have one massive hit. And then on the end, we got the controlled delivery. We've got risk management, which was less intrusive on the way that they were delivering, and that the issues were a lot less because they had the right information, they had the full picture, and they created plans which are absolutely representative of what was happening. The customer was aware and then bought into it because this time they understood what the single version of the truth was. And the governance was then absolutely enforced rather than you're not doing it, okay, you know, little slap on the wrist, please do it next week. This was, if you don't deliver, we'll take steps. And slowly that started to move the program into a stable state. So next slide, Sam. And instead of writing a huge pack for the delivery team, this is what I gave them, just to show them how hard they were trying to work. I don't know if you can read that because some of it's quite small, but on the bottom, you can see the yellow stars. So the way that they'd actually calculated this across the whole program was number of applications, which was on average that they were putting on each machine. And then they just times it by a number of days. And what that gave us was, in this case, 9 applications, 10 days, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, divided by the number, and it was giving us a certain figure. Now, what I did was I created this lovely little diagram at the top, and you could see that there were some red ones which were extremely complex, there were some yellow ones which were average, there were some green ones which were easy. But the calculations were so far out that against the program plan that what they had, they were achieving 19% of input and throughput against what was expected. When we moved the calculation and we did a program reset with the new calculation that we'd socialized with the customer, they were suddenly, within 2 weeks, achieving 72%. And that was a big change. And it wasn't anything that anybody had done wrong. It was somebody had made an assumption, but nobody had checked it. Easy as that. You know, people were assuming it was this, or this, but it was just that digging and taking the time to look through and work out what it was. It was one assumption that hadn't been verified, and it had gone across the whole program. So program reset, I took it and co-delivered it until it was stable. Next one, Sam. Okay, and then once it was stable, I handed back to the senior program director and the account executive and said, this is now your baby again. Thank you very much for having me. I hope to see you soon. Next one, Sam. And the critical thing was, once we'd done that reset, it was actually delivered on time, which was a feat that people weren't expecting. So lots of lessons learned. It was around assumptions and not taking things at face value. It was about digging and understanding where those failures were and making sure that we standardized those processes and the program plans were absolutely where they should be. So there we go. Next one. Okay. So another case, this is a completely different type, but standard organization, working in-house, no external partners. They just said, we are really not delivering. You know, anytime we try to do a transformation organizationally, it fails. It goes wrong. We don't deliver. We fail to deliver almost every initiative that we push through our IT team. If we do get something, it's late. It's always over budget. It takes forever. Please just come and sort it out. So this one I took on board. I looked first at the corporate strategy documents and always start with that. Always understand what it is that the overarching objectives are. I did the interviews with the leadership team, cross-section of anybody that would quite happily talk to me. Some were nominated, some heard that this person was there to help them and take their pain away. So I got people knocking on my door. Looked at all the program plans, the projects, everything that had been submitted through the PMO and what they planned to deliver in actuals, just to make sure that those assumptions were right. I sat with the IT team, had lots of coffees, too many coffees, but got the background from them as to what their feelings were. what their pain points were, the things that they felt that they couldn't tell the people within the wider organisation where they were struggling. Looked again, governance boards and change history. So next one. So outputs around this. The original output was a digital maturity assessment. Even though the team initially didn't think this was relevant, I took them through and said, I need to understand what baseline you're working from, because if the expectation doesn't match where you are right now, there's absolutely no way that you're going to meet something which could be here, here, or here, 3 levels above where you're working at the moment. So I wanted to also understand what their capability was as a team and how they got to that, and to produce a training needs analysis to get them up to the industry standard that I would expect of an IT team of 40 who were working for me or anybody else. We did look at the assets. Now, something which came out of all of this as I started to ask for all of the plans was, do you have all this? And the answer was no. Nothing had been kept up to date. We couldn't find the soft copies of lots of different SLAs and contracts for systems. So we had to start from scratch. I talked to HR, looked at potentially revised job descriptions, looked at ways forward in order to help put in place something that they could aim for and look at, because even their job descriptions were massively outdated and they didn't know what they were expected to do. And then the big one was an investment case. This was an £11 million investment case because it was in such a poor state. So the outcome. Okay, so finally, rather than being burned by everybody across the organisation, the IT team were actually given some recognition for this daily struggle that they had just to keep on top of BAU. They'd had years and years of underinvestment. Okay, so they were recognised for the fact that the unclear IT landscape meant that they were scrabbling around. They were trying to do a day job. It was taking them 3 times longer than they should have done to do absolutely anything that people would normally regard as routine and run-of-the-mill. So the business case bought in, absolutely clarified. £11 million was translated, not just for IT, but across the whole organisation into 169 projects to bring the organisation up to where it should be. And unfortunately, there were some recommendations as well around capability for the departmental leadership, because some of this, excuse me a second. There were some issues around capability for one individual who should have been better. And appraisals were set to incentivize the teams to go with us on the journey. And the training plan, of course. Excuse me.
You all right, Tracy?
I am, yeah.
Good.
So, of course, we had methodologies and engagement plans for projects. Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. That was absolutely brilliant. Just take a second and have a drink. I tell you, for me, what came across the most during the presentation there, Tracy, is that if I was the CEO of any business and I had a team or a project going wrong, you are the person that I'd want to come in and get things. You have a real, and I've said this to you before, and without blowing smoke up your backside too much, Tracy, but Simon will vouch for you, and I'm sure a couple of other people on the call will. You have a very calm demeanor. I can see you going into a business and being able to just calmly go about really unearthing what's going wrong. And I think on a lot of the calls that we've had, we've talked about, you know, why things go right. And it's not about technology, it's about people. But I think the thing that comes across with you, Tracy, is that when it comes down to these projects, attention to detail and really kind of digging deep into what's going on, not making assumptions, finding out what people's responsibilities are, what the plan is, setting expectations. Really, there's no getting away from yourself, Tracy. You really understand what's going on, and there's if people are doing things wrong, it's down to them. And I'm guessing that you really get to the detail, the finer detail, to find out what's going on with these projects.
Absolutely. Sometimes people have made assumptions. In the case of the case study I've just taken you through, they assumed it was all IT's fault, and it was down to something along the strategic lines in the business. It was something that had built up over many, many years. And yes, what their failures were one element of that, but it was an organizational failure as a whole. And IT were just getting the brunt of it because they were impacting across all of the other departments and they had the highest visibility. So some of these things can happen. It's important to always look whether it might be a program management issue, or it might be a process issue, or it might just be a cultural issue. It could be any of these things, and you can't just assume straight away. You have to rule these out.
Yeah. I think a lot of us here I mean, I've seen this happen so many times in, small or large organizations, where it only takes one bit of detail to be missed, and it has a domino effect where a lot of things can then build up and go wrong. That's brilliant, Tracy. I really, really thank you for your time. And I'll put it out to the floor. We've got quite a mix of people today, a lot of different backgrounds, industry domains. Would anybody like to kick off with a question? Before we do though, if anybody wants to ask a question, just raise your hand or give me a nod or send me a message on the chat. The one thing I was going to ask you though, Tracy, you said there were 42 key causes that come up. Have you sort of, over your time, have you come up with like a playbook of these things? And what's the most common?
Yes, I have a playbook. Yes, I have an Excel file that I've built over about 16 years. So it's everything that you can imagine. I've even got drop downs for what type. It makes it quick and easy. The biggest one is, I think there are probably two: capability and culture. I think no matter how good your technical teams are, if the culture is adverse to what you're trying to do, the brakes will go on. You have to work very, very hard to bypass that.
Okay, so I'm gonna put out there. Mark's asking a question. Mark, do you want to jump in?
Yes. First of all, Tracy, excellent. Really, really, really enjoyed that. And I think I'm kind of sitting here kind of bewildered by, all the things that could possibly go wrong on a project transformation. And I was trying to get to the kind of the nub of it. And I'm thinking, in your experience, are these projects, you quoted like at the beginning, McKinsey saying 70% of projects fail. I mean, it's a staggering statistic. Is it a case that ultimately in those cases, that 70% cases, they're actually set up to fail? In other words, there isn't the right focus and energy and thought gone in at the outset, and really that's where they're failing. And do you think that's the case?
Yes and no. Some will fail from the outset because they've not been fully thought through. You've not had the right people. I said to Sam earlier today, never underestimate the value of a good business analyst. They are incredible people to work with. You get a good one, your chances of success are much, much higher because they will get your requirements right up front. They will help you with your business case. They will help to guide what it is that you're putting forward and to get that benefits analysis done and to bring people onto the same page. So that's a really big one. But I spend a lot of time thinking before I start, because that thinking time is free. Once the project starts, it's not. The further right you go down a project or a program or a big portfolio, the more it's going to cost you to put something in place to remediate if it's gone wrong.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think, in the case, the first case study example you gave, it's interesting. I think you said there were two partners involved. Mm-hmm. I mean, because I think a lot of this is about the sort of, once you get into it, the kind of vested interest and the, people not raising their hand and saying, actually, this isn't going right. And I think typically that's one of the things in why the partner selection is so critical and the contracting. But is it okay? I mean, what was in it for the partners in those scenarios? Were they benefiting effectively from the kind of the slippage and the delays? And
oh, absolutely. If it could have got to the point where one partner could say the other one had failed, they could have then started to put in claims that potentially we could deliver as a replacement partner for you. And yeah, there's a huge amount of bum fighting going on in the background, and you have to bring people together around a table and try and pull them in the same direction. It's a very, very difficult thing to do when you have different commercial constructs, you have different drivers, you have different ways of working. And I saw that on the Atlas program many years ago, where there were 14 partner companies working together, everybody from IBM to to every consultancy that you could think of, and pulling everybody in the same direction was a mammoth feat. So I learned from doing that in order to apply that knowledge to this.
Excellent. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks for that, Mark. Andy Flack, how are you doing?
Okay. Hit the mute. Tracy, that was great. It left me wanting to hear more, and also to see your spreadsheet and to see those 42 reasons.
Everyone's nodding there. Everyone's nodding there. Tracy, I think you need to publish a book.
Yeah, or a playbook.
Put you to somebody who will help you to do the publishing of the book if you want. So you can talk to me about that. One of the things that I noted, which I thought was quite good, was when you said you just went out and listened and sat with the people and had coffee and whatever. Do you find that the problem is actually better known sometimes down at the grassroots than it is at the top?
Absolutely. But sometimes people have tried to raise it and it's been ignored. And then eventually they give up and they just think, this is really hard, but I've just got to try working with this rubbish that's not doing as it should. And no one's listening, so I can't do anything about it. Yeah. And the thing that I do when I go into programs and projects and go in as an account leader sometimes is I will actually say, I'll stand up and say, look, I'm here to help. I'm not here to crucify anybody. Anything you tell me will be in confidence. It will be used constructively and we will find a path forward. I'm here to help put things right. And that open and honest approach has worked extremely well because people just want to do their jobs in a lot of cases. They just want to do the best that they can. They don't come to work to think, well, I'll see if I can just work amongst this mess and leave it as it is. People are genuinely quite honest and open in the way that they want to deal with you. So a lot of the time when they share that with you, you can then show action and say, look, I've put this right. This has gone to the right people. We are going to re-engineer this. This is going to be made to work. And the relief sometimes is brilliant because then you get others come to you and say, right, help me fix this, help me do that. And it's a cascade effect. If you're doing it within a consultancy arena and you're working with those teams over and over, you build a reputation quite quickly that she will help you. She's not here to burn you. And that is really quite important. If you're going from one client to another, it's the way that you initially set things out with them and you speak to them and you say, I'm going to help. And you build that trust quite quickly. You become a trusted advisor. You give a lot more because you're having to build that relationship quickly.
Yeah. That's a really good point, isn't it? Because I guess any time you've got a consultant coming into an organization, they are viewed as the sort of the bad guy or the evil empire coming in to kind of mess things up. But a lot of the time you're there just to solve problems, aren't you?
This is a very different type of consultancy. It's not I'm here to look at a few processes, or I'm not here to do the usual things. I'm not here to do the value management. It's just I've been asked to come in and make this work, and I will do this sympathetically, and I'll do this in a way that engages you, that teaches you, that upskills you. I'll do all the right things because my vested interest is making sure that you don't need me back.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Any other questions for Tracy? No, we all good. I think one thing that I was going to sort of ask again, Tracy, was in your experience, what's the biggest project for you that's gone wrong, or not sorry for you, but what's the biggest project where you've had to come in and rescue it? Was that in one of the case studies?
No, it's not. I remember, I could get myself into a lot of trouble for this, but hey. I remember at one point I was taken into an
You
office.
don't need to mention the company name. We are
I won't
recording,
mention,
remember.
I know. I was taken into a company office and I was asked if I would go and fix a government project which was going very badly wrong. When I got there and looked at it, I said I can actually split this down into a set amount of phases. I will fix you phase one, but from that point, you have to build on it once that's been realigned and it's been done, because it's so big and so huge and so complex. But the template that I put forward will be valid on the next 3 phases that you do. I also made a couple of conditions that they remove the program manager that was there, because she had 3 years postgrad experience and she was running a very, very large government program for a competitor of ours. And they said, we can recommend it, but we can't actually ensure that she goes. So I did my bit. I put it right. I tried to do the right things, and it was a multi-million pound delivery. And the first stage went well. The second stage, the program manager was left in and she was too inexperienced to deliver it. So you can do as much as you can do. That's the only one that I've not been happy with over the years, where I know what should have happened and the recommendations weren't taken forward because of the partnering model.
Thanks for that, Tracy. I think both Lionel and David have raised their hand, but Nick also raised the hand. Who would like to go first with a question? Nick?
Yeah, hi Tracy. You mentioned a government project that failed. Are there any that have ever been successful, as far as I know?
It depends on what you call the government project. If you class the defence one that we worked on, the Atlas programme, that was £4.6 billion worth. Yes, it was a bit over budget, but when you're doing something that's never been attempted before, and you've got 2,000 consultants working on it from 14 companies, you are going to have to turn some big wheels to even keep it going on the same track. But it was delivered. I think the thing I was proudest of on that one was, you may remember, probably 15 years ago now, almost, there were some issues about people being blown up in the field. They couldn't get the armour plating, they couldn't get the bits that they needed. That was the service catalogue that they were struggling to build, which was not getting 2 pens from one base to another. It was around getting a whole battlefield set up out there and getting the right equipment. And I remember taking that. They tried to do it and they couldn't, and I got that to work. So that was something I was quite proud of.
No, thanks. Our armed forces will thank you for sure. I know. I remember when the Americans were accidentally shooting some of our own troops, weren't they, with their missiles?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
David, Lionel, you've got your hands digitally raised. Do you have a question for Tracy?
Thanks, Sam. Mine's just a very quick one.
Yeah, great.
Just on your second use case, what would you say is, from internally based IT organizations, were your biggest obstacles in solving the problems where, as you alluded to, IT were getting the brunt of it, but the organization couldn't see that it wasn't entirely IT's fault?
The biggest problem for me was around the blame culture. People were so angry because all they could see was it failed. They'd actually stopped talking to IT in a number of cases. They started to bypass them. They were doing their own projects. It was very, very difficult to get to the bottom of what was actually happening. And it was only because I was able to interview a number of people and talk to the IT team themselves in confidence, and for them to say, we are getting the blame for some of this, and no, we're not delivering, but these are the underlying reasons. And it was that cultural barrier and that blame. So you have to work around it sometimes.
That makes complete sense. Thank you.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Simon. Lionel, I think you had a question for Tracy.
I did. Hey, I've got to mention something before asking my question. A couple of weeks ago, somebody made a reference to the Phoenix Project book.
Okay.
And,
yes, I think it was Stuart, wasn't it?
Yes, and I never came across that. And since I read that one and the following one called the Unicorn Project. And I've got to say, Tracy, everything you described is also in those books, and they are things that I've experienced. And that's just why I love those meetings that we have on roundtables, because they help me put into context or put words on things I've seen, experiences I've lived. And that's fantastic. At the moment, I'm just started in a new company, totally new business, market for me, no experience in this. We are going through a digital transformation project, or program, should I say. And it's just kicked off. And I've already noticed, as a brand new guy, outsider, knowing nothing, a number of sort of red flags. Do you have any tips for me on how I could approach this with the executives or even the program manager without hurting people's feelings?
Okay, so just a few quick questions. Are you running big projects and programs, or are these just separate little initiatives?
No, that's a big one.
A big one. And do you do this in-house or with partners?
With partners.
Partners, okay. Are you familiar with the contractuals or any of the history with the partners?
Nope. Brand new guy.
So that's probably the first thing. I'd see if I could grab somebody around a coffee machine and just see if you can get yourself some background, something informal as a chat. How did we get to partner with these guys? How long have we been partnering with these guys? Do you know anything about the commercial construct, about what they're here to deliver, and understand what the onus is and and what everybody's signed up to on both sides? Because from that point, you've got a starting point to then say they're either meeting that or they're not. And you can then start to take that forward. That's your first step. Just make sure that you understand what those relationships are, what they're signed up to do, what's in the overarching contract. And then you can start to talk to the teams and understand. And if it does look as if they're not delivering against that, and things are specified in the contract, you've got the legal redress if you wanted to go down that route later. But initially, just raise your hand and say, I know I'm new, but am I missing something? You can do it on a very subtle basis. Am I missing something? Are they supposed to be delivering this? Because I can't see this. Is there somewhere that I look? Hopefully that might just ring some little alarm bells somewhere. You can always go down that path a little bit further down the line and say, look, I've been here for a few months now. I understand the background, I understand where we're going, but I'm seeing some holes. Where do we raise these? Who do I talk to about them? How do I get those to the right people's attention? So it's little steps to start with. Make sure that you don't put your foot in the wrong place initially, but just make sure that you've got the facts before you go forward, because you might be talking to the sponsor, and if your facts are right, you're on a very steady footing. You can actually say, I don't think this is working because here, here, and here. I understand it's your project. These are the things that you have to be very, very careful how you broach, because you don't want to upset people initially. You want them to come with you on that. You want them to support you back, especially if you're in a company and you're on probation. That's, it's a big thing. Is that helpful?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Lionel. Simon, welcome back. How are you? You're on mute.
Very good, thank you.
There you go.
Hey, Simon.
Hi, Tracy. So I was just going to say that you talk a lot about projects and getting transformations back on track, and you and I both worked on projects together, where actually you've gone in and the transformation has been something which is just not possible. And I think one of the things that you have to do right up front is just do a sanity check. I know a blog article some time ago, Digital for What, which had come out doing some work for a utility company. And because moving into the next the accounting period, they said, you've got to become digital. So they set up a digital transformation project. And when I went in, it was fairly obvious that they had no idea what digital meant or why they were doing it, but they'd already spent £3.5 million with a well-known organisation on a project which got canned about 2 days later because they realised that there was no reason to actually do the project other than for digital transformation when they hadn't actually set a scope for it. And I think sometimes you just have to look at the feasibility of a transformation. I spent 9 years working for one of the big banks. They bought a new brand. The CEO at the time said, we're going to integrate this business in 8 weeks. 8 years after I left, 5 years later, they still haven't fully integrated the business. There was absolutely no way. There was no alignment culturally. There was no alignment technically. The way they sold products was different. The channel to markets were different. And if you don't get that right in the first place, you don't have a transformation. You have a failure of a government project. And you mentioned the logistics one. I mean, when I went in to look at the joint logistics project for the MOD, the biggest thing I did was actually refocus it on the people that needed the solution, not the people that had instigated the project, which was a bunch of civil servants in Banbury who ran the stores, and not a bunch of people who are actually out in the field using the kit, wondering why they'd got tropical socks when they're in the Antarctic, and an Antarctic kit when they were there. They actually sent them snow camouflage when they're in the middle of Afghanistan because they said it's winter now, which was a bit odd. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of projects, particularly government projects, fail on, is because there is either no case for the transformation or the case for the transformation is misaligned. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it or how much you try and realign it, you're not going to deliver anything because there wasn't anything there to deliver in the first place. And that's what I'd say. And I know Tracy and I have worked on a number of those projects together in the past, although it seems a very long time ago now.
Yeah, you have to know when to hold your hands up and say, stop.
Yeah, you can't do this. Or to go back and actually just realign it and say, well, why are you doing this? How does this align with your business objective? And sometimes, I've just read the annual report and then I've gone back and said, I can't see why you're doing this because your annual report doesn't even mention this £50 million project that you're running. Yeah.
It's thank you for that, Simon. I really appreciate you asking the question there. And but is this not a systemic thing in all big businesses? And it actually, is it more likely for a big organization to fail? And is that why government organizations fail? Because they're just really, really big?
Yes. I mean, in my opinion, it is very much that. And if you go back to some of the big failures that you've had, that are highly publicized, like the NHS, the whole digital transformation in the NHS. If you actually went in and asked any of the civil servants or ministers involved and said, what does success look like? What does a transformed NHS look like? If I'm a patient, if I'm a doctor, if I'm a clinician, and I go into that organisation, what does it look like to me and how is it different? And if they can't articulate that, then what the hell are they doing? And very often they can't articulate that in a large organisation. And then when you try and trace, well, why are you doing this transformation? Oh, it's because somebody said something was wrong and we needed to change it. But they hadn't actually done any analysis of what it was wrong. What does best practice look like? What does the end result look like? How do I measure success? How on earth can a transformation succeed under those circumstances?
So it comes back to what Tracy was saying right at the start of this, that it's about making sure there's a proper plan in place and a reason for doing things, and attention to detail, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, I can't remember who said it. It might have been me. And so, whack-a-mole is no substitute for strategy.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
No, true. Very true. And as Nigel Lemon said in his presentation, Mike Tyson's a great fighter. What was the oh, it was something about having a great plan, and then
everyone has a great plan until they get a punch in the face.
There you go. Yeah. Andrew, you were raising your hand there, not digitally, but actually you were raising your hand. There you go.
I was just going to say that the 20 plus years ago, DOH was actually trying to put PCs into general practices so that they could move patient records from hospitals to GPs and whatever. Okay, I was part of the initial planning that was going on and how to do it and scoping out the kit and everything else. Quite junior maybe at the time, but the problem which we had was that we had Microsoft, we had Syntegra involved in this in particular, and it became a case of slicing up the pie and trying to get a bigger slice. So Tracy, how do you actually address it when you've got partners in a transformation exercise, when they start basically fighting over the bones and forgetting what it is that what the objective is to get the thing moving and whatever, and they're just trying to figure out how to line their pockets?
Yeah, I've had a number of these. Many years ago, I went into a very, very well-known company that does aircraft engines, did do cars and some nuclear stuff, which shall remain nameless. And there were lots and lots of partners in there, and they were starting to fight over who was going to do what. And it was a one-upmanship game when we were delivering as to who could get one over on somebody else quickest, who could show that that partner had failed to do their bit. And as a consequence, the projects and the deliveries were failing. At the time, I was brought in and asked to run the global infrastructure programs for them, because it had got to the point where it was getting so nasty that it was really impacting the delivery across the organisation. So what I actually did was I sat down with the board and said, at this point, we understand that everybody wants a bigger slice of the pie. And I understand what the commercials are and how that should be working. First, we need to hold people accountable for what it is that they're not delivering and make it quite clear that we're all pulling in the same direction for the current delivery. And if the current delivery isn't done as it should be, then it's going to mean that partners are going to get reduced contracts rather than increased. And it was a very short, sharp shock across the bow when it was done in a big meeting. It was done with the leadership across all of the accounts who were running their bits, and effectively the behaviour stopped. But it was a very terse meeting to say, we're not delivering as we are. You know, this is one workshop. This is a root cause analysis. What's not happening and what do we need to change? Because if not, we're going to start reviewing contracts. And that was enough to the words penalty clauses and things like that tend to pique somebody's attention.
I think the problem there, though, was slightly, the root cause there again was slightly different, because it was because you and I both worked there. I think I was the nasty person that sent you there.
You were, yes. Thank you for that, Simon.
And it was a big account for EDS, and EDS at the time being, the world's janitor when it came to systems. EDS were the sole supplier to the organisation. When EDS got taken over by HP, Deloitte saw an opportunity to whip in and say, hey, look, you're going to get the best out of these guys. How can they deliver the IBM parts of what you're doing, or the digital parts of what you're doing, or systems integration parts? Because of HP, they're just going to sell you HP storage, and they're just going to sell you, And at the time, they had a relationship with Sun, HP, IBM, EMC. They had SAP, they had Mapix, they had everything. And Deloitte went in there and said, you need this multi-vendor ecosystem. And the problem was that Deloitte sort of went in and had the ear of the CTO and the CIO. And it was confused messages. So as Tracy said, you suddenly had all these guys coming in wanting a bigger piece of the pie because it was a big prime account. All Deloitte were interested in was every time a project went wrong, they said, oh, you need another accountant from Deloitte. That's another £2,500 a day. Thank you very much. And that went on for quite a while until they kicked out both the CIO, and then you can read the history of this in Computer Weekly. They kicked out the CIO first and the CTO, and then they kicked out Deloitte's, and things settled down a bit. But I think sometimes, the big bank I worked for, they had the same thing. They constantly had consultants coming in from the Big Four telling them to centralize IT. And as soon as they'd done that, they went in and said, no, that's not working. You need to decentralize IT. And Tracy and I often got, sort of mixed up in all that kind of thing, because they come along and said, right, we need to decentralize IT. And you said, well, what does that mean? And sometimes I think that you do get some of the big four, their methodologies, and I think you're right, Sam, huge companies, huge corporations, huge government departments, they listen to a management consultant because they came from one of the big four. They take what they say as gospel, and then when it doesn't work, they go back to that big four consultancy. And often from them, the answer is, we need to buy some more consultancy and we'll tell you what's gone wrong. When actually they're the root cause. But I mean, Tracy, I don't know what you feel about when some idiot puts you in on the ground in an organization to try and fix a problem that sometimes it's very hard to do that.
I think for me, what's hard to hear as a non-techie person that's been around technical projects for 24 years, whether it be delivering contractors into companies, placing permanent staff. I always get a lay of the land. I always get to understand what the business is trying to achieve, what the organization's trying to achieve. And at the moment, I'm talking to a lot of people in the NHS right now, and there is a real desire for the NHS to modernize their IT systems. So we're talking to a lot of organizations now about digital pathology. So if anybody, if Andrew's there, he knows exactly where I'm going with this. And this has been a problem and a challenge for many, many years. But it does feel like now, because of the pandemic, because of COVID, if the NHS can't get this right, we're all going to hell in a handcart, really, aren't we? And it's can we mobilize people? Can we consolidate services? Because it's going to hopefully save money for the NHS, but more importantly, it's going to give better outcomes for the patient. And you said earlier about, Simon, is if you went into a hospital right now, what does it look like from a patient's point of view? And I've been talking to a lot of people in digital pathology, a lot of techie people, a lot of clinical people that are desperately trying to solve this problem right now, and especially with COVID, it seems huge right now. And if we don't get this right, if we don't utilize technology to save costs for the NHS and deliver better outcomes, we're buggered, aren't we? And it's not just about egos and power in a big organization and, falling out with the IT director and Deloitte's getting their day rate up or whoever. If we don't get this right, we're all buggered. There we go. That's a bit deep for a Thursday evening, isn't it?
It's just, I just leave one thing on the NHS. I had a friend of mine's godfather to one of my daughters. And he worked for Capgemini for many, many years on several.
Andy's having a beer. Yeah. Well, okay. I think I've caught the mood right there, haven't I? Yeah. Sorry, Simon. You were saying.
No,
so's Lionel.
He worked for the NHS on many of the digital projects for many years, and his wife decided to emigrate to Australia, where he coincidentally ended up still working for Capgemini and ended up in the health service. And he said to me many times, he said, Australia have got it sorted, because what they actually did was they put the clinicians in charge of the project and the technology guys in charge of mapping it out and saying this is what's possible. It's not run by civil servants. It's not run by top level consultants. It's run by the people on the ground. And they very much took that view. Let's go and ask the doctors. Let's go and ask, the nurses. Let's go and ask the patients what they want their health service to look like. And he said the difference is so refreshing. And that's what we and we don't do that generally in major projects.
But this comes back to the talking about building products rather than projects. It's how you frame what you're delivering and frame it as a product. Put the customer at the center of that and make it all about them. If you look at any startup that has an app or some form of platform at the center of it, it's about putting the customer right at the center of that. And that's how you build a good product. That's how you build a decent product. So if we take that, with the NHS, you're absolutely right. the customer effectively are the patients and the people delivering the service, which is the doctors and the clinicians. Andy, you had something to add to that. I know you've personally been there yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, 20 odd years ago, I was an IT R&D director for a medical software company. You know, as I said, we were involved in the one of the original attempts to get the patient records working, electronic transfers. And the speciality that we worked in was getting the pathology records out of the system and handing them over. So, you know, hence the fact I turned to my beer in the process of doing that. I would agree totally that you need to talk to the people at the lower level, the ones who are using it. So that involves the patients, if you like. It also involves the clinicians. It involves the nurses. It involves whatever. One of the things you have to be careful of, though, is in the NHS, they will tell you if you get 5 doctors in a room, you'll have 6 opinions. So, you know, it's that they are a little bit competitive with each other as well. But actually bringing it down to what it is that you are trying to do rather than the person who's had the initiative of getting this done. So as Simon said, you know, get the bureaucrats out of it. They're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. Yeah. Because they've sent you off on this little bureaucratic route, which has got nothing to do with actually getting the problem solved. You know, one of those can also be the project managers as well, actually, because I have some friends who are in the NHS. One of them was a nurse, and she said that every week they would have to fill in some documentation about what had been going on and everything. They would pass that over to somebody. Somebody would then collate all of that. They would put it into a machine. It would come out the other end. A report will come out. It will go into a pigeonhole for some on the ward. It would sit there for a week. They take it out of the pigeonhole and throw it in the bin. All right. So basically, the whole process was completely a waste of time. Yeah. And some of these things, like you said, you know, why are we doing this? It's not just the ones where it's a new thing going in. Yeah. You know, why are you trying to do this? Why are you trying to make this change? Sometimes it's a case of, why are you actually doing what you're doing at the moment and wasting so much time when you could actually be making a change?
Yeah, yeah.
We used to in the old days, mainframes, when we used to be pumping out reports every week, we used to occasionally forget to distribute the reports deliberately. And what we would find is who complained.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ones who complained, we went, oh yeah, here's your report, no problems. Yeah. The ones who didn't complain, we went, right, take them off the circulation list. That's cut down the runtime. We've now can do the rest of it. We need to have some sort of thing like that for the NHS, just as the thing there.
I like that, Andy.
How are we going to throw Tracy in there in order to prove to them that, you know,
well, this is it.
It's not a database.
if anybody's going to be able to go into an organisation like the NHS and fix it, clearly it's Tracy. James, I think you've got your hand digitally raised, so I'll bring you in. You can unmute yourself. James, just give us a bit of because you come from a very sort of different in terms of industry, the advertising industry, TV advertising. Do you want to just give us a little bit of an intro to yourself, and then let's hear your question or your point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So I'm CTO of a company called Clearcast, who you probably haven't heard of. I'd be surprised if you had. We're owned by the major broadcasters of the UK, so that's ITV, Sky, Channel 4 and Turner, or now Warner as they're called. And our responsibility is to pre-clear all of TV advertising. So that's check it for claims, anything misleading, anything that may cause harm or offence before it's broadcast. And it's a requirement of the broadcaster's licenses. Unlike most other advertising media in the UK, TV and radio has to be pre-cleared, and it is covered by law, both the Communications Act and law covering what can and can't be said. I use a great example, we have to check a lot of things. I use a great example, which is Carlsberg. There's a reason Carlsberg say probably the best beer in the world, and that's because they can't say they are the best beer in the world because they can't prove it. And I'm sure anyone in this round table who drinks beer would say Carlsberg definitely isn't the best beer in the world by their own experience. thanks. So we spend a lot of time watching adverts, and I've spent a lot of time doing digital transformation on the company. Was a department in ITV that started in 1955, and they had faxes and scripts and tapes being couriered left, right, and centre. And we very much drilled the company down into what is really important and making the best use of what we've got, making the best use of the cloud. I did a big piece to actually change the system we were using because it's very bespoke because of the way that the UK is in terms of advertising clearance. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on that I won't bore you with. I could talk for probably about 3 hours about advertising clearance and what you can and can't do. I've had my fingers burnt quite a lot on digital transformation. And I was just putting my hand up just to chip into what Tracy and Sam and Andy, you were saying. I think that the key with all of these projects and whatever you take on them, no matter how big or how small, is actually the stakeholder engagement, and where you've got people like the NHS example, where you've got people who are trying to run it, who have no skin in the game for the actual end result. That's where you get issues. And that's why you have to bring in the end users, but also you need someone relatively senior to say, this is my vision. Now, how does that vision map to what the end users actually want, and try and bring those two together? And I found that that's definitely the best way. And if someone is what we call a cockerel, and they're all shouting and making a big noise, but not actually putting anything into the process, and don't actually have any wish of what comes out as to whether it fails or succeeds, other than their next job or their next paycheck, those are the people that you have to remove from the project. That's all I really wanted to say.
I think that's what we need, is the digital equivalent of, in the old days, they used to make the architect stand underneath the arch as they took the hoarding down. Yeah. And it was like, if it doesn't work, be it on your own head, literally. So, you know, how do we actually do this? What we really want is to sort of like just get all of the bureaucrats underneath that arch, take the hoarding down and just let it go. But, you know.
I come from a software development background. That's where I really cut my teeth in the last 20-ish years until becoming a CTO. And I always say that if you ask an engineer to invent a toothbrush, they'll put a two-stroke motor on it. Why? Because they can. Not because it's needed, but because it's something fun to do. And engineers have a habit of doing stuff because it's fun, or it's something new, or it's something they can take to their next job. The same way, if you leave it to the customer, you'll have something that does 50 billion things, but none of them actually work because it's too complicated. So it's trying to find those balance between the two.
Thank you for that, James. I like that, and Andy, yeah, I like your digital. Yes, let's see it. I think the big thing there for me is, you know, Tracy, you always tell me, and you always sort of talk about what's in it for me. Not you saying what's in it for me, but the customer, all the stakeholders, it's what's in it for me. And if you get that right, and then they are committed and bought in, and the expectations are there, then you're going to struggle to go wrong, really. But what's come across quite clear there is stakeholder engagement, having someone senior in the organization who has a vision, has a clear picture of what they want, and gets the buy-in from all the people. The amount of times that I've heard from people who've said, yeah, well, so everybody sort of like was on track with what we were going to do, but nobody told the business. And so all of a sudden, people in the business, you know, the staff, the people kind of, oh, what's this? What are we doing now? So communication obviously is a massive thing there, isn't it? Tracy, how do you want to finish with some words of wisdom for us all?
Words of wisdom. Okay, so if I was going to kind of leave you with something insightful, it would be, don't have any preconceived ideas if somebody tells you there's an issue. Keep your mind open. Look under the stones that your intuition is telling you to look under. You'll often find that those are the right ones. And just make sure that when you're going forward, that you do things sensitively, because obviously you might be going into an organization as a consultant, in which case you'll be going in, those people still have to do their day jobs after you've left. Or if you're going in there and you're going in on a contract or under short term, just make sure that when you do give findings and you do give bad news, it's done in a really constructive way. I think that's a really big thing to take away, because you don't want to come in and destroy people's destroy people's livelihoods. You want to go in, help them, guide them, upskill them if you need to, and leave the place in a better state that you found it, whether it be to transform a business, whether it's just to operationally improve a business. But it's really important that you do it in the right way.
Thank you for that, Tracy.
One thing that we used to get reminded when we were doing debugging many years ago was, if you can't find what's wrong, look at the bit which you've been thinking is obviously okay.
And never assume.
Exactly.
There's a very rude phrase about assumption is that, and I won't finish that.
Makes an ass out of you and me.
Yeah. Yes, but that's the best phrase that anybody's ever given me. Never assume.
I live by that.
I live by that. My first day in recruitment, my mentor pulled me to one side. He said, "Right, Sam, never assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me." And I messed up on a contractor day rate and not qualified what the contractor wanted versus what the client was willing to charge. And my first day in recruitment was an absolute car crash. Nearly the last. It was absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Again, I really appreciate everybody coming and turning up to listen to our speakers and presenters. Thank you, Tracy, for very much at the last moment stepping into the breach and delivering a brilliant presentation, as always. I was personally just transfixed. And when you're in the groove and when you're in the mode, you're absolutely brilliant. So thank you for that, Tracy. Next week is, pardon?
Send out the list of 42.
Yes, we needed the list of 42. I think we could do a blog or a whole roundtable just on that. Next week's half term, I'm off with my kids. I'm sure a lot of people may or may not be off with their kids or doing other things. The week after is Bonfire Night, I think the 5th of November. So we won't be doing one there. So I think the next one is going to be the 12th of November. That gives me a couple of weeks off, which is great. And it gives me a couple of weeks to make sure we get another cracking presenter. And I've got a couple in the pipeline. I think, James, you're lined up to do something, I think, in November, maybe not.
If I get sign off and I can talk about it, but yes.
Yeah, I know.
Get sign off, Tracy's coming in to help me.
Brilliant stuff. If anybody would like to, to present on one of the roundtables, they've got a burning issue that they think that we should be covering, please let me know. But that just leaves me to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a great evening. We will have the recording of this available on YouTube in the next couple of days. So anybody that's missed it will be able to watch back. If you want some of the other presentations, just let me know. And I'm going to be asking people for their testimonials. So please, 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 I'm going to be bugging you over email to give us a bit of a testimonial on why you've attended the roundtables, what you've got from the roundtable events, so we can do more of these. So thank you again, everyone, and really, really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening.
Cheers, Sam.
Thank you.
Tracy. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.